In early 2020, the COVID-19 outbreak caused major disruption across Asia. Government implemented lockdowns, travel restriction, and business closure to control the spread of the virus. As a result, economic activities were severely affected. Major sectors such as tourism, manufacturing, retail, and services experienced sharp declines. This was mainly due to reduced consumer demand and disruption in supply chains, which forced many firms to reduce operation for temporarily shut down. This disruption led to widespread job losses and declining household income. At the same time, uncertainty increased, making both consumer and businesses more cautious in spending and investment. Consequently, overall economic growth slowed significantly. Several ASEAN countries even recorded negative GDP growth during the peak of the pandemic. This situation highlights how closely linked public health crises are to economic performance. Next, despite the various policy responses such as fiscal stimulus, wage subsidies, and monetary easing, many ASEAN countries still experience rising unemployment during the COVID-19 pandemic. Business closures, shorter working hours, and weak consumer demand created instability in the labor market, especially in contact-intensive sectors like tourism and services. Higher unemployment can negatively affect GDP growth by reducing household consumption, lowering productivity, and slowing down economic recovery. However, the extent of this impact was not the same for all countries. This is because ASEAN economics differ in terms of economic structure, policy effectiveness, and the severity of the pandemic they face. As a result, the magnitude and the direction of the relationship between the unemployment and GDP growth remain unclear across the ASEAN region. Therefore, the study aims to better understand how unemployment affected economic growth in Asia during the COVID-19 period.
Okay, now I will briefly explain our analysis objective and the theory used in this study, which is purpose law. Okay, first let me explain about the business objectives. The main goal of this study is to examine how rising unemployment affects GDP growth in ASEAN countries during the COVID-19 pandemic. COVID-19 caused major economic disruption, especially due to lockdown, business closure, and reduced economic activities. Secondly, this research aims to understand the relationship between unemployment and economic growth using open law theory. This theory helps explain how change in unemployment level are linked to change in GDP growth. By applying this law, we can better understand how job loss during the pandemic effect overall pandemic COVID-19. Another objective is to highlight the impact of lockdowns and business disruptions on labor market and production. Many businesses, especially in service, tourism, and manufacturing, were forced to reduce operations or shut down completely. This directly increased unemployment and reduced output. Lastly, the study analyzed economic change before, during, and after pandemic recovery, the period from 2018 to 2022. This allows us to compare normal economic condition with the crisis period of the recovery phase. Okay, so I will briefly explain this about Occam's law. Occam's law explains the negative relationship between unemployment and GDP growth. In simple terms, when unemployment increases, GDP growth usually decreases. This happens because few people are working, which means less production, lower income, and producing spending in the economy. During the COVID-19 pandemic, many workers lost their jobs, especially in sectors like tourism, service, or manufacturing. And as unemployment rose, overall production fell, leading to the GDP contraction in many Asian economies. Occam's law helps explain why this country experienced economic decline during the period. In conclusion, this research used Occam's law to clearly show how rising unemployment during COVID-19 contribute to slower economic growth. By analyzing data across different periods, the study provides a better understanding of the pandemic impact on labor markets and economic performance in Asia.
Now let's move on to the data and variable we use in this study. For our analysis, we use panel data covering 7 Asian countries, namely Malaysia, Thailand, Singapore, Indonesia, Japan, South Korea, and China. The time period of our study is from 2018 to 2022, which allows us to compare the situation before, during, and after the COVID-19 pandemic. In this study, we use two main variables. The dependent variable is GDP growth rate, measured in percentage. The variable represents the overall economic performance of each country. The independent variable is unemployment rate, also measured in percentage. This variable reflects the labor market condition and the impact of job losses during the pandemic. According to economic theory, specifically Occam's law, we expect a negative relationship between unemployment and GDP growth. This means that when employment increases, GDP growth is expected to decline. Next, we move on to the trend analysis to observe how GDP growth and unemployment rate change over the time. Looking first at the GDP growth rate trend, most countries recorded stable and moderate growth before 2020. However, in 2020, there was a clear and sharp decline in GDP growth across nearly all the countries. This reflects the severe economic impact of COVID-19 pandemic, including lockdown measures, business closure, and a sharp decline in consumer demand. This sharp variation in GDP growth over the time provide meaningful time series variation, which is important for our panel regression analysis. Next, when we examine the unemployment rate trend, we observe a significant increase in unemployment in 2020. This rise was mainly driven by job losses in sectors such as tourism, manufacturing, and services, as many firms reduced their operation and closed entirely. In 2021 and 2022, as countries gradually reopened their economies, unemployment rate began to decline while economic activity resumed. When we compare both trends, we clearly observe an inverse relationship between the GDP growth and unemployment. During the pandemic, rising unemployment coincided with declining GDP growth, while economic recovery was associated with falling unemployment. This observed pattern provided visual and theoretical justification for our econometrics model and support the inclusion of unemployment as the explanatory variable in our regression analysis. Therefore, the trend analysis strengthened our expectation of a negative unemployment coefficient, which we later test formally using some model.
Good day. In this segment, we explain the methodology and economic framework used to analyze the impact of COVID-19 on unemployment and economic growth in Asian countries. This study adopts a quantitative econometric approach using regression analysis with panel data from selected Asian countries between 2018 and 2021. Regression analysis is used because it allows us to measure the strength and direction of the relationship between unemployment and GDP growth. The economic theory guiding this analysis in Occam's law. Occam's law states that there is an inverse relationship between unemployment and GDP growth. This makes it highly suitable for analyzing economic downturns such as the COVID-19 pandemic, where rising unemployment often leads to slower economic growth. Now, let's take a closer look at the economic metric model used in this study. The model is expressed as GDP growth equals beta 0 plus beta 1 multiplied by unemployment plus an error term. In this equation, GDP growth represents the annual economic growth rate, while unemployment refers to the unemployment rate in percentage terms. Beta 0 is the constant term, which represents the baseline level of GDP growth when unemployment is 0. Beta 1 is the key coefficient in this model. It measures how changes in unemployment affect GDP growth. The error term captures other factors that influence GDP growth, such as government policies, global economic conditions, and unexpected shocks like COVID-19. Based on Occam's law, we expect beta 1 to be negative, and in simple terms, higher unemployment leads to lower GDP growth. These econometric models allow us to statistically test the relationship between unemployment and economic growth during the COVID-19 period.
Okay, so now we move to the econometric result, beginning with the pool or ordinary least square regression, which fulfills the assignment requirement of applying an econometric model to analyze a real-world economic issue. The pool OLS model combines the data from 7 Asian countries between 2018 and 2022 and assumes that all countries share the same economic structure. The estimated unemployment coefficient is positive at 0.45, is statistically insignificant, with a p-value greater than 0.05. The R-square value is also very low, indicating a weak explanatory power. So, from an economic perspective, this result doesn't support our presentation title, as it contradicts to the Occam's law, which predicts as a negative relationship between unemployment and economic growth. So the key limitation of this model is that it ignores the country's specific characteristics such as difference in labor market, institutions, economic resilience, and policy response during COVID-19. As a result, pool OLSLs produce biased and unreliable estimated in this context. Okay, so to improve our analysis, we estimated a fixed effect panel regression, which is more suitable for cross-country data that directly aligns with the assignment instruction to expand the methodological approach. The fixed effect model controls for unobserved of time-invariant country-specific factors, allowing to each country to have its own intercept. So the result shows that the unemployment coefficient is negative at negative 3.88 and statistically significant with a p-value below 0.01. So this finding is consistent with Auckland's law and directly support our presentation title, Unemployment and Economic Growth During the COVID-19 Pandemic. Economically, this means that during the pandemic period, a 1 percentage point increase in unemployment reduced a GDP growth by approximately 3.9 percentage points. Compared to pool OLS, the fixed effect model has a better fit, indicating a more reliable and meaningful econometric relationship. So this slide summarizes why the fixed effect model is most appropriate econometric approach for our study. The POLS model suffers from the unobserved heterogeneity, which leads to biased estimate when country-specific factors are omitted. So, in contrast, the fixed effect model isolates within a country variation over time. So, this allowing us to capture the true impact of unemployment changes during the COVID-19 shock. So by choosing the fixed effect, we strengthen the validity of our economic analysis and ensure that our results are theoretically consistent and statistically reliable, fulfilling a key learning and objective of this assignment. In accordance with the assignment requirement to include the data analysis and supporting visuals, this category illustrates the relationship between the changes in GDP growth and unemployment. The downward sloping fitted line shows that it's a clearly negative relationship, which visually support both Auckland's law and our fixed effect regression result. From an econometric standpoint, this visual evidence confirms that the negative correlation is systematic rather than random, strengthening the credibility of our findings.
To conclude, our econometric analysis demonstrates a statistically significant and economically meaningful negative relationship between unemployment and economic growth in Asian countries during the COVID-19 pandemic. The POLS model failed due to unobserved country-specific effects, while the fixed effects regression successfully addressed this issue and confirmed the Auckland's law. This directly fulfilled the assignment objective of applying econometric methods to understand a major global economic shock. And the data used in this study are obtained from the World Bank and the International Labour Organization. From a policy perspective, this finding implies that government should prioritize employment establishing policies such as wage subsidies, job retention schemes, and recycling programs during the economic crisis. Overall, this analysis shows how econometric modeling can provide valuable insight for evidence-based economic policy making. Thank you.